may be familiar with GrantBook, and for others, GrantBook may be a bit new for you, so I just want to give you a high-level overview before we jump in. GrantBook is a technology consulting firm, and we focus exclusively on the needs of grant makers and impact investors. And we really specialize in matching these organizations with vetted and right-sized technology solutions so that you can run your organization better. Our goal is to improve the flow of over $100 billion in philanthropic aspects so that we can better drive catalytic social change. And we take a networked approach to working to achieving this change. We work with like-minded partners and organizations who want to see this kind of change in the world. So bottom line, what we do is we help make it so that grant makers and impact investors can spend less time on inefficient and ineffective digital systems so they can spend more time on the things that matter to their organizations. So let's get started. Today's focus is technology adoption, and the main reason we chose this to be the topic of our webinar is because we've worked with many clients and we've found that technology can be amazing, it can really leverage and increase productivity in an organization and increase impact, but it doesn't matter unless people use it. So our speakers today, they've spent the past year or so implementing new technologies in their organization and have taken specific strategies to ensure that the right people end up using the technology in the right way. Some of our speakers may end up talking about technology that you may not be familiar with, or it might be different from what your organization is currently using. But the main thing to remember is that the strategies that they're going to be talking about are transferable to any software, any technology situation. So our format for today, our agenda, we're going to spend the first few minutes hearing from our speakers about who they are and their organizations. We're going to spend about 30 minutes of moderated discussion where I will be interviewing them, and the questions I will be asking them have really come from working with clients who have, and these are the questions we've heard from clients over and over again. We have the unique opportunity of working with clients, and we've seen the knowledge that exists within organizations, and this is an opportunity for us to share that knowledge across the sector. And then towards the end of the webinar, we'll be spending about 10 or 15 minutes on questions from the audience. And so there are two ways that you can have a question, and you can ask them throughout the webinar, but we will be addressing them at the end. So the two ways are through Twitter. You can tweet us at grantbook.org. You can see it in the slide there, or you can tweet your question with the hashtag GrantBookSpotlight. And you can also, on your webinar control panel, down probably towards the middle, the bottom of your control panel, there's a section called Questions, and that's where you can ask your question. And like I said, we'll be addressing those towards the end. And then GrantBook, we're always trying to continuously improve our webinars, so we'll have a short feedback form that we'll be asking people to complete. And for those that do complete it, we'll be selecting 10 people randomly to receive free digital consultation, digital strategy consultation sessions with us. So let's get started and hear from our speakers for today. We have Rachel Flynn from the Omidyar Network. We have Lauren Philson from the Rockefeller Foundation, and we have Jereme Bivins also from the Rockefeller Foundation. So let's start with Rachel, and if you can tell us a bit about your role and a bit about your organization to get us started.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Rachel Flynn. I work with the Omidyar Network. We're a philanthropic venture capital firm founded and funded by Pam and Pierre Omidyar. Pierre was the founder of eBay, and we're one of several of his and his wife's philanthropic ventures. We are both a 501c3 and an LLC, which allows us to make both grants and investments. And we invest across 5 initiatives, both in the U.S. as well as in emerging markets. My role at Omidyar Network is specifically to think about how we can build out our network of portfolio organizations, better connect them with us, with each other, and more broadly how we can leverage our network to amplify both our impact and the impact of our portfolio companies. So that's part of that job description, and I'll talk more about this, but I led an implementation for our firm of a CRM and investment management system.
Okay, thank you. And Lauren is actually joining us. She's at a summit right now, and she's joining us by phone. She's able to take some time out of her day. So Lauren, tell us about your role and your organization.
Hi, yes, thanks for having me, first of all. And my name's Lauren, and I'm part of the Rockefeller Foundation. We are an over 100-year-old philosophic foundation that has 2 primary focuses. We do work within resilience and inclusive economies. Jereme can likely elaborate on that a little bit more than I can, as he's been at the foundation for a bit longer than I have. My specific role there is to support the implementation of digital systems. So we are in the midst and sort of wrapping up the first phase of a massive digital overhaul, which included the release of a new public website, a re-engineering of our intranet to replace a former SharePoint environment with something that's a little bit more reminiscent of a social media feed. And we've moved all of our file storage to cloud architecture within box.com. And the last component of that at the moment is the implementation of a digital asset management system, which we are currently going through the selection process with vendors right now.
Okay, thank you. And Jereme, you're also from the Rockefeller Foundation. What's your role there?
Yeah, I'm the digital media manager for Rockefeller, which means that my portfolio exists inside of communications, but touches largely on technology and the way the foundation uses technology to communicate externally as well as internally. So I touch everything from the website, social media, as well as some of the internal systems that Lauren just alluded to, our internal proxy, document storage through Box, as well as a few other things, our grant-making software.
Okay, well, thank you all for taking the time to join us and talk about the challenges and successes that you've had. We're going to pause here, and we're actually going to do a live poll to hear a bit about the folks that are in the audience. So my colleague, Rahi, is actually going to initiate this poll, and what you should see, click in front of you, a window should pop up, and there should be a question asking you to select the role that best represents your current position. You can select any of the following and then click submit. We'll take about 10 or 20 seconds to do this now. Responses will be anonymous, but it's a great way for us to know who's in the audience and also for us to share with the rest of the audience who's joining us today. So we'll give about 10 seconds more. Just click one of the options and then click submit. I feel like this is the kind of thing that requires the Jeopardy soundtrack or something. All right. And Rahi, is it possible to share the results? There we go. This is our first time using this. So we can see that 30% of the folks that are joining us today have roles, management roles, 19% are program staff, 15% are IT staff, 15% are consultants, and 22% are other. All right, thank you. So we will close that poll, and let's move on to some of our questions. So I am curious, Rachel, if you can give us a high-level background. You touched a little bit on it already, but tell us what problem were you trying to solve with new technology, and what technology was Omidyar Network implementing recently?
Yeah, so I think a big takeaway for me, and hopefully that I will get across in the next hour, is that the problem that we were looking to solve definitely grew once we started thinking about solving a small problem. So initially we were looking really just at focusing on finding a better CRM tool, a way of managing relationships, contacts, events. For us, we it didn't have any great sort of cohesive way of doing that, and it meant passing along a lot of spreadsheets and having people edit them, and it turned into a real challenge every time we had to host an event. Once we started talking about that, it really quickly became clear that any system that could do that could probably also do other things for us, and that caught the attention quickly of the investment team, and particularly the investment management team, which is a group of people that actually manage the investment process from pipeline all the way through various approvals until an investment is in our active portfolio. And they saw a lot of opportunities to improve that process, to make it more efficient. We had been doing it on a wiki up until that point, and so we didn't have any way of pulling a report, seeing what our portfolio looked like, looking back on our pipeline. And pretty soon it was clear that almost every department across the firm had a real challenge that a system could potentially solve. The finance team, the legal team, the recruiting team, and it was really exciting to start to see something bigger come together and actually become one piece of a larger systems upgrade across the organization. So as part of this, we also moved onto a different document storage system. We brought in a new, more robust portfolio management tool. Salesforce, which is the system that I was responsible for, is the largest part of that and touches the greatest number of people. But it was really one component of what became a true systems upgrade across the firm.
Yeah, that's a big jump from Wiki to Salesforce. A lot of stopgaps probably, workarounds in the meantime. I'm curious, how long from the initial point when it was decided changes needed to be made to actual launch? How long? What was that timeline?
From the decision something needs to happen here to when we actually went live with Salesforce was about 18 months. The actual building out of the system that I worked most closely with, Salesforce, only took about 10 of those months. So we spent a really long time leading up to that, bringing in a couple of consultants, thinking about what was this upgrade going to look like, right tool for us, and even once we identified Salesforce, who's the right partner to work with to help us implement this. So that process in and of itself took quite a bit of time, and then once we actually knew we were using Salesforce and we had chosen a developer, from there it was the better part of a year.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. And Jereme, can you tell us about some of the context of the Rockefeller Foundation's technology adoption situation? What prompted this change, and what tools did you move to?
Sure. I'd say the decision came through at the end of 2013. I joined the foundation in October 2013, so about December we had also come to that decision point where we decided something had to shift, primarily looking at our external website. We're a 102-year-old foundation, and we collect tons and tons and tons of information on the programs and projects that we fund, the programs and projects that we explore but maybe decide not to fund. And all of that information is being locked up inside the foundation. And so it was a very deliberate act to start sharing that stuff to the website. Blog posts had to be made, reports had to be uploaded and shared out, and it became very cumbersome, so only a small fraction of what we were creating was actually seeing the light of day. So we decided we were going to do our external website, and we wanted to be able to have all of that stuff, those images, those reports, those videos, everything that we were creating with our grantees to go out in a more seamless fashion. And when you start taking on the external website, as Rachel alluded to before, other problems and opportunities start surfacing. So as we were looking at our external website saying, how can we make sure that reports get out more quickly once the program team has approved them and looked them over and accepted them from the grantee? And so that said, well, we're going to need a place on the back end, like our SharePoint site at the time, where people can upload them, approve them, and it would automatically upload. And then it came to term, well, we're also going to need a place to store them that's not just in our CRM or in our GrantMaker software, which is completely internal. And that's where we said, okay, well, we now need more than just an external website. We need the external website to talk to our internal website, our intranet, and we also need a collaboration system, a cloud-based collaboration system, and document storage that would link all of these things together. So in December of 2013, we said we need a new website, and by January, February, or March, we said, okay, we also need a new intranet, and then we also need a new collaboration software, which we turned to as Box.
So implementing one new technology meant that you realized it sounded like that other changes needed to be made.
Yeah, absolutely, and not just in technology, but also in process and things like that. Implementing technology is basically just continuous learning. You know, it's never one and done.
So as we can hear, both of our organizations that are on the webinar today implemented organization-wide changes over a fairly short amount of, or a fairly long amount of time. And so what was, oh, yes?
No, nothing.
It's okay. And I'm curious, really moving into a little bit more about the design and the actual implementation, is who were going to be the main users of the technology and how were they involved in customizing the new technology? And for those folks who have just joined us maybe a little bit late, I just wanted to highlight that again. The technology that our panelists are talking about may be different from what your organization is using, but the key thing is what we're going to start talking about now is the strategies. And technology adoption, as we'll hear from our panelists, seems to be something that doesn't have to wait or can't wait until the training part of implementation. It can start even in the design. So I'd love to know from, maybe we'll start with Rachel, just who were going to be the main users and how did you involve them?
Yeah, one thing that we realized early and that was a challenge for us was that the folks that had most of the information that we needed were different than the people who needed it. And it was exciting to have a system where people who needed information could easily get it from the people who had it. Thinking about the context for relationships, understanding what might have happened in a particular interaction or meeting, context for a deal that we've made or passed on. Most of that information, you know, lives with folks that work on our investment team, but is really valuable to people who work in other departments. And it was a trick to figure out what's the incentive for the people who have this information to take the time to put it into a system so other people could use it. And so we realized that early on and realized that we needed to particularly do a lot of outreach and build a lot of support among those key users who are the folks that might be more reluctant and feel that they had less to get out of a system like this, but to really demonstrate to them the value that it would bring to them. Salesforce, in our case, is something that every single person at our firm uses, so everyone is a stakeholder, and I actually went through and thought, like, almost to the person, what kind of user were they going to be, what did we most need them to do, and what was the best way to reach out to them about the system. We had a working group of people from the very start who were involved in most steps of the process of building it out and testing it, and those included representatives from all of the major departments who had a stake in the success of the system and who had a process that we were somehow trying to capture.
All right, so identifying all the key users and key stakeholders and then engaging with them and figuring out how each user or department would perhaps use the tool differently. Mm-hmm. And Lauren, I'd love to know how you engaged on the Rockefeller side. How did you identify the main users and how did you engage them in the design process?
Well, as Jereme mentioned, the project itself started several months ago, and several months prior to my coming on board. And at that point, our colleague Jay had done an excellent job of campaigning around the foundation. Our targeted audience at that particular time was predominantly program staff, as that's the largest percentage of our staff. But we do incorporate our operational teams at the same time. So we conducted several stakeholder type meetings. Jereme can expand a little bit more on Roxy, our internal system, but for both that and Box, really just making sure that all staff was aware that the change was coming, that the correct members of staff were looped in to be to actually see the technology live in action, to understand what the changes were coming down the pipe, and then also to be able to provide us with the feedback so that we can conduct a business analysis of how the teams may best utilize the technology. And so you could imagine between the program staff and the operations staff that the use of this type of technology is very different, but we even found that within the individual teams of those two different areas of the organization, that those teams would function very differently. Sometimes it was just simply due to their geographic locations. Other times it was due to the content or the context of the work that they were conducting and the relationships that they had with grantees. So we did have some grantees outside the organization that were already using similar technology to us. What we did from a training perspective was that we actually did a slow rollout, and that also allowed us to kind of learn as you go, because we could only conceive of so many different scenarios and situations whenever we were broaching into two technology platforms that function predominantly off of unstructured data. So as we encountered scenarios and encountered different use cases, we were actually able to further build our training curriculum to support those.
So again, sounds like a similar and useful strategy was to engage key stakeholders and figure out how people would be using the system. Jereme, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that's a pretty great summation.
I'd love to know, so really before even getting to training, you're working with staff, you're letting them know what's coming, and I imagine that also helped to buy investment and just people like to be kept aware. Were there any internal and champions that you identified, and were you able to leverage internal champions, people who were really on board and early adopters?
Yeah, so at the beginning of this whole process, one of the first things that we needed was to get this obviously approved by our management team and our partnership. And so fairly early on, I presented to them the idea, what we were hoping to accomplish, the budget, the timeline, but also a real explicit ask to them, which is not just support this in terms of giving us the budget that we need and the training time that we need, but also it's really important that all of those people be not just champions of the system to their respective teams, but also users of the system, and that the expectation and that the requirement for us to be successful was, yes, of course, that they encouraged and required the folks on their teams to use Salesforce, but that they, of course, had to be users themselves. And so I really tried to set that expectation with them pretty early, and from that group pick out a couple of champions who seemed really excited about the potential of a system like this. In general, people who championed the tool had come to Omidyar Network from organizations that were using a system like this really well, so they saw the potential of what a system like Salesforce could do for us, and when they got to ON were frustrated to see that we didn't have something better. So those people tended to be really excited because they knew how well it could work, where folks who had never been somewhere that had a system like this just didn't have a good enough idea of what to expect. And then my other, I think, set of champions were the folks that were on this working group that were actually, meeting weekly or every other week to help design and test the system as we were building it. And those people then went back to their teams and said, hey, this is what we're working on. I'm representing us and our interests in these ways. And, people in departments other than my own knew that they had a representative and a champion, and that the interests of their team were being included as we designed this big system. It wasn't enough to have me saying, oh yes, we're including stuff from the legal team, because what do I know about what the legal team needs? It was really important that we had sort of a delegate from that team involved in the builds most steps of the way. I wouldn't say every step, but on all the critical junctures, we did have that working group involved in signing off.
So identifying champions, people who raise their hands, who want to be involved, and it sounds like usually those people are the people who have used the technology before, and it also sounds like you were able to leverage the internal champions to have multiple voices of support and going out into their own departments. So yes, not just you having to say it's great and it's awesome and we all need to adopt this new technology, but many voices.
Exactly.
And Jereme, how did internal champions, how are you able to use that at the Rockefeller Foundation?
Yeah, I think you've hit on a couple of great points there. I mean, first, Rachel had said before about involving a lot of different people, and specifically the people that are used to the old technology, because they're the ones that have the everyday use. They know what they're doing. They know what they want the system to do, but they're kind of hitting the confines of it. So when we did the digital overhaul, which again included our external website, our internal intranet, as well as our box implementation, we had a core group of stakeholders for each project. But we also looked outside of those groups to incorporate everybody in the foundation, essentially. So we would do, these 10 people, let's say, would be meeting on a monthly basis at first, so they could kind of over wireframes, go through visioning, that kind of stuff. And then we would start saying, let's test features now on people that have never used this thing before. And that way, everybody was ready for all these three systems to come on board. And they weren't surprised when we actually did the launch sometime later, and they could tell us how they were already using the server-based file storage, or how they were using the website to search for documents that were ending up in the public space, or how they were using SharePoint to work with teams overseas. And so when it actually launched, everybody felt like they had a hand in it, and it was actually doing the things that people wanted or needed from the system. And the second piece to that is the way we do technology implementation. I think too often before, as a sector, we just decide on a solution to a problem that we think we have, and we're like, here's the solution, everybody get on board and use it, and without actually having people on the ground to say, well, why do we need this tool? What is this actually doing to help me versus the old process that I had? And I think that that's a different mindset in how we introduce technology as something that we all adopt and are excited about versus just seeing it as a solution to a single problem, and then probably seeing more problems surface as a result of introducing something as a here you go, one size fits all.
Right, so if many people are going to be using technology, perhaps those people or representatives from those groups or departments should be involved in the whole process from the get-go.
Absolutely.
And just a little additional framing, and to echo what Rachel and Jereme were speaking of, I think it's important for project leads to differentiate between your stakeholder group, which is likely, has executive buy-in, senior level management, and they're really looking at the project from an overarching operational perspective. Once you reach a certain point with the implementation of a new digital system, the folks who were part of your original stakeholder team likely aren't going to be your power users, and so then it's important to then identify your ambassadors. And these are the people who are very heavily using the system. They're very engaged within their departments or in a cross-functional aspect with other teams. And they really have their ear to the ground and can help you surface issues, can help inform what best practices may be, and actually can implement a train-to-trainer approach and take some of the load off of the core project leads in making sure that everybody's successfully onboarded.
So it sounds like the internal champions can be useful in the beginning phases, and then as really the system gets rolled out or design, the architecture is happening a little bit more, that's where the power users, so the people who are going to be using the technology, the new software the most, can be involved, and then that can break down into further ambassadors who can assist with training. So that actually segues perfectly into training strategies. Lauren, maybe you can start with what was Rockefeller Foundation's general approach to training, and what were some specific strategies that were used? It sounds like ambassadors, so using staff and colleagues, people besides just the project team were involved in training. How else, what other strategies were used?
Well, we actually had the very rare benefit of doing a slow rollout, as I had mentioned a little bit earlier in the discussion, and a lot of organizations don't have that. It's typically place the software in and you turn a switch and you've done all of your homework ahead of time and you tackle issues after the fact and work on your optimization and streamlining. Here we were able to do our optimization in tandem with the release of Box, which is our cloud file collaborative storage. Roxy was a little bit different because it was a flip of the switch. However, it was not a business critical system like our file storage is. So what we did is we identified teams. We would have a data steward. So part of the Box implementation was actually migrating all of that team's data from our traditional server systems and from our SharePoint environment into Box. And so working with that data steward, again, identifying what the use cases for that specific team may be to help tailor the training to that team's particular needs.
Can I just pause you with a question? What do you mean by data steward for some of our folks that may not know?
Oh, so the data steward was predominantly responsible for making sure that all of the team's data and files actually did migrate from one system to another. They helped us identify all the locations that the data and files were living. They helped us define dates. In some cases, it required a significant amount of file cleanup to be able to effectively move into the new systems, and some of that was fed from permissioning levels, who should have access to what areas of documentation. So the data steward was really instrumental in helping facilitate that, but then also helping facilitate the training schedule, the rollout, the implementation. They also, for the most part, transitioned into those ambassadors where they are able to flag if a team is having a particular struggle of some sort where the general users may not even know that an issue exists. They may just think, oh, this is new technology and this is just how it is. So that data steward had a little bit of advanced training so that they would be able to identify whenever those issues were arising.
So when you were doing your rollout and associated training of the system, who did you start with the data stewards? Like how did the rollout progress? And how did you decide who to do first?
We did it on a team-by-team approach. So originally we would have 2 separate half-hour sessions with the data steward to identify what needed to be migrated through the systems. And then we needed to actually schedule the trainings. We would go in a cadence of about 3 teams per week for the initial rollout. That was for our program teams predominantly. When it came to the operational teams, there were added complexities. For example, when you start talking investments in finance and the very intricate data that's being held within their spreadsheets and systems, we needed to take a little bit of extra time and really analyze how they were working with their current file sharing environment to how they would work in the future with this particular platform.
And were trainings, were they in person? Was it remote? Was it like a handbook situation or a webinar situation?
All 3 except the webinar approach. So for the New York offices, we conducted every training in person. And then we would conduct, desk drop-bys, follow-ups, hey, how's it going in the lunchroom sort of conversations, really just continually engaging and checking up on all of our users, whether they were the data steward, whether they were an ambassador, or whether they were somebody that was, maybe having a little bit of a hard time adopting the new system. For our remote offices, link sessions, which is similar to Skype, became a very critical tool. So, especially for Bangkok, staying up until 11, 12 o'clock in the morning to be able to work with that office. And then we did have a custom training manual that we wrote out. We also created quick guides, so those were our reactionary approach whenever these new situations or questions would arise as we went through the incremental trainings. We would surface an issue and release a quick guide as a response to that.
And how long were it? It sounds like the quick grad. It sounds like there was a mix of planned training and then also being able to be responsive to needs with the quick guides. How long were those? Long documents, or how long were
The
they?
original training manual was probably 20 to 30 pages, and it was very contextualized. We didn't use any of the training materials provided by the vendor for that particular one. And for the quick guides, they were typically a one-sheet PDF, just something that people could use for more advanced operations within the tool. So, yeah.
Okay. So a mix also of in-person and documents where people could walk through themselves. And Rachel, I'd love to hear about the Omidyar network. What was your training approach, and what were some of the strategies you used?
So we didn't have the luxury of getting to do a slow rollout because our system was capturing our investment approval process. We really did need to flip the switch because an investment couldn't be half approved on a wiki and half approved in Salesforce. It needed to all happen essentially all at once. We are lucky in that we get our entire firm together in our California office once a year for a week-long summit. We do portfolio review, we talk about strategy, we talk about budget. So we knew that we had this opportunity, and it was also a really nice forcing function for getting us ready on time. We really knew this is when we need to do launch and training, and it was a pretty firm date. But we did turn it on that day for everyone, and it was really nerve-wracking. Our developer was there, so he was on site, which was really nice, and I think actually really nice for him. I don't think he ever had been invited to actually see a launch and to see how users were responding and being trained. He wore a suit and he took pictures, and it was really sweet. So we did. We had an hour with the entire group, and we talked sort of at a pretty high level about why are we using Salesforce, why now, what's it going to do for us in a pretty broad sense. And we also took that opportunity to have folks that were more senior in the firm speak about their support for the system, and I had kind of planted people in the audience. There's 80 or 90 people there, and I had people queued up to stand up and say, I'm really excited, this is going to help me better understand my pipeline, this is going to help me with planning for next year, this is going to help us with events, and I think that generated some interest and some excitement, and quite frankly, I had been doing that for 18 months. I didn't start selling Salesforce the day it launched. I really started selling it the day we decided we were going to use it, and would work it into conversations, and as people were asking questions, I would say, Salesforce is going to solve this problem, and it's going to be really exciting. So it was not the first time anyone was hearing about it by any means. And then after that first hour, we broke up into groups by department and had more departmental specific training. So the investment team got a more in-depth training on their process and what all of their functionality was going to look like. And actually, that was the time when people first logged in and went through step by step and had a chance to play around in the system. So we broke up, I think, into 5 or 6 groups for that. And then plenty of follow-up. So on-site in Redwood City, where about half of us are, we did office hours, which didn't quite catch on. But I think even just the optics of people seeing that we were sitting there if they needed us was important for people to know they had support. And then I took a trip to all of our global offices and visited in London, in Johannesburg, and in Mumbai just to do a refresher. So all of those people were at the original launch and received the original and initial training, but I thought it was important 6 or 8 weeks later just to check back in and make sure that they knew we hadn't forgotten about them, that the system was working well for them, and that they knew about any updates that we had made since launch and training. We did a weekly email for about 6 months with little tidbits, things that we had updated, things that we had fixed. I thought it was really important when people had a question or a problem and I was able to address it, not just to tell that person that I fixed it for them, but to tell everybody that I fixed it for them. Not every little thing, not like a typo, but if we were able to address a real functional problem, I thought it was pretty critical that people saw that they could come to me with problems and they would get addressed and fixed, and that the system was flexible and adaptable and could probably be updated and altered in a way that was going to work better for them. And so I wanted those things to be pretty visible. And then we did a little scavenger hunt every week, and I would ask little questions that had to do with having to find something in Salesforce. So some of them were easy, you know, what's this person's job title? And all that means is looking up the person and knowing what their record looked like. And some were a little more complicated. You would have to actually build a report and find some aggregate number of investments or values, and we would give out prizes. I gave Amazon gift cards, and again, when somebody submitted answers and they won, I wouldn't just tell them they won and give them their prize, but in the next week's email, I would say, you know, Kathryn won last week and she got a gift card and here were the answers. So that, I think, for the people, not everybody participated, but at least everybody saw that that was happening and that people were participating. And my hope is that that generated a little bit more interest and hopefully made it a little more fun.
Wow, so it sounds like you really took advantage of being able to bring the whole team together and then kind of drilled down with further strategies. So doing training for specific departments, making sure you were following up with departments, but also international offices so that everyone's on the same page. And then sounds like there were a lot of different ways that you continued to leverage some of the knowledge that was being shared with individuals and then just sharing that on an organization-wide scale. And
I would add just that one quick step on design, because you reminded me of something really important, which was involving international teams in the design process. Something as simple as a phone number. It's really easy for us in the US to think that a phone number looks a certain way and has a certain number of digits. That's obviously not the case in other parts of the world, including places where we have offices. So it was also really important to make sure that we didn't just have people that represented every department in Redwood City involved, but also that we made sure to include international folks as well, partly because they're our colleagues and they're a part of our firm and it needs to be a system that works, but also because of those really technical and logistical things that would have been easy to overlook coming from the US.
Yeah, a small thing can be a big problem. Thank you. So those are a ton of strategies. I'm just going to pause for a second just before I ask my final question and give folks in the audience a chance to, we are coming up to the audience Q&A portion. So this is your chance to ask a question either via the webinar control panel. There's a section in there, questions. You can enter your question there, or you can tweet us a question at the GrantBook handle, grantbook.org, or you can tweet your question with the hashtag, which is just at the bottom of the slide, GrantBook Spotlight. And some of my colleagues will gather those questions so that we have, we can answer anything that's on your mind that you would like to ask Rachel, Lauren, and Jereme. So my final question is, and we'll start with, well, my final question is, and if I could get a 30-second response from each of you, from your perspective, what was your biggest challenge with technology adoption in your organization? And maybe we'll start with Jereme.
That's a tall one. I think our biggest challenge is probably trying to build a solution that actually could solve a lot of the problems that started surfacing up, because we really didn't have, you know, we have a team that's dedicated to a portion of their portfolio to doing this, but when you're trying to build something that can do all of these things for all people, where you're collecting information, where you're sharing information, where you're allowing them to work on things together, it takes a ton of time, and being able to aggregate a lot of different viewpoints during the visioning stage, putting up all sorts of post-it notes when you're going through all the different features that people want, all the different stuff that should be going into the software and solution and then delivering it and being able to iterate on top of it, because it's not a matter, again, of just delivering something and letting them fly with it. It's building an iterative process, so it's growing with them as we go. So it's really about being nimble and having enough time, and I think that no matter what we do, we probably would have that as a challenge.
Okay. Lauren, biggest challenge in technology adoption?
I think one of the biggest challenges that we encountered was that we found that our teams, although they're doing similar work, were actually functioning very differently from one another. So all part of the business analysis portion really needing to tailor trainings to specific teams. What that did was expose an opportunity for the improvement of processes across the organization, which is something that we're still actually looking into a little bit further and grappling with where we can and how we can quickly improve there.
Okay, and Rachel, what was your biggest challenge?
Yeah, a lot of those answers resonated with me. I think for me it was finding the balance between when to say yes and when to say no when people had requests from the system, and recognizing that this isn't going to solve every problem for every person, and it just can't be all things to all people, but I so deeply wanted it to be successful and for people to adopt it, and so I really wanted to say yes when people had requests and wanted to move things around and wanted to add content. That was really exciting to me when people engaged and had suggestions and requests, but I spent, I think, the first couple months after we launched, like, really saying yes to all of those things, and ended up with a bunch of fields that one person had asked for that actually didn't make any sense or didn't need to be there. So finding the balance between, you know, wanting to make sure that this is a tool that works for people and that they feel a sense of ownership, but also that it's a clean, effective and efficient tool for all of us as a firm. So that was a challenge and still is for me.
That is a tough line to toe. All right, we're going to do another live poll. So I'm going to ask my colleague Rahi to initiate the poll, and there should be a screen popping up any second now. You'll see, there we go. And so this question is really a chance for us to understand what's your experience with technology adoption. Are you in the process of adopting new technology? Is it something you've done in the past? Are you doing it in the future? So you can select as many options as you'd like, and then click submit. We'll give you about 10 more seconds to do that. And then again, this is an anonymous poll, and we'll share it so that us organizers, us panelists can have an idea, as well as the rest of the audience. Again, cue the Jeopardy music. All right, let's see if we can see the responses. Okay, so it looks like about 38% of people are in the process of adoption of one new technology. 31% are in the process of adopting two or more, which sounds like that was also a Rockefeller Foundation situation. 44% are planning to adopt new technology in the near future. 38% have successfully adopted. Yay! That's amazing. And about 19% of folks are not planning to adopt new technology anytime soon. Thank you for your responses there. We are learning all the lovely features of GoToWebinar. So just as before we launch into the Q&A, Rachel, would love to know just if you could highlight some of the key insights that are here of advice you would give to an organization that is adopting new technology.
Yeah, I think I touched on most of these. Support from key folks in the organization, including senior management, was really critical to have that early and often throughout. As we were building the system, to point out problems that the system would solve, I think was really critical and meant that people were more excited when it finally came around to having to learn something new, and announcing as we made upgrades and changes publicly, which was advice that I got early on. Finally, I think having a critical, dedicated person owning the system was really critical. We had tried implementing Salesforce 4 or 5 years ago, and one of the major reasons that I think I've heard from my colleagues, I wasn't with the firm at the time, was it wasn't really clear which department or which individual really owned the process. And then finally, it's not here, but I would just say, and this may seem obvious, but a new system needs to solve more problem than it creates. It needs to be easier for you to use than not to use. If it is easier for you to opt out of using a system and you can still get your job done well, it's not a system that people are going to use, and that seems really obvious, but I think for us that meant there are certain things, internal processes, that can only be accomplished in Salesforce. If you want to get a deal approved, it has to happen in Salesforce, and that's really a forcing function to get people in the system, and once they're there, they poke around and they see what else they can use it for, but it needs to solve more problems than it creates, which isn't to say that it doesn't create the minor problems, but it needs to be a real value to people. I think I'm probably preaching to the choir, but getting a group of people to do a new behavior, to learn a new system, to have a new password, these are all pretty major hurdles, and if there's value there, of course, people will adopt and be excited about a new system.
Wise words. Lauren, in 30 seconds or less, what are your key insights, your key pieces of advice?
Yes, dedicated resources are absolutely essential. I've walked into so many projects where it's being managed as a portion of somebody else's full-time job, and as the project progresses, you need the dedicated attention to be paid to the details and to the overall vision. So absolutely, having the dedicated resources, if that's something that you can, your resources will allow for. The group trainings, even if you aren't able to do the slower rollout, as we were, if you're able to break down your training sessions in a relevant and contextual way for the users, it's much easier to keep their attention during that time period. It may be an hour, it may be half a day, but if you're really able to tailor the use of the technology to those users day to day and to really understand that yourself and how they may execute with the new technology, you're really going to see a noticeable improvement in how that technology is adopted. And then it says here roll out training in phases, but I just take that a step further and say that rolling the project out in phases, really having a very clear roadmap, and a lot of this can tie back to your ROI. If you're looking for a good return on your investment, identifying what your quick wins are from the design stage of the project is really important, because you can easily identify problems that are time-consuming, or loopholes, or redundancy that's happening between individuals and teams. And if you're able to remedy that pretty quickly, you're justifying yourself and making a good case for the project continuing to move forward and to continue funding the future of the digital progress at your organization.
Great, thank you. And just before we jump to the Q&A, Jereme, high-level key insights and advice?
Yeah, I have probably not much more to add to what's already been said, but I mean, number one, leave enough time and resources to the unexpected. This kind of goes hand in hand with what we were seeing before in the polling. People are adopting more than one system, because usually when you enter into a system upgrade or introducing a new system, you will encounter a lot of things that you didn't expect. So for example, when we did our website and our internal systems, we encountered an issue with the taxonomy between our grant making software and what we wanted to name things externally, so people understood the different types of topics that we were covering. And so we needed to take a step back and then reconcile those things and build a system on top of the systems we were creating that would make that translate, so it was easy to understand that climate change resilience is the same thing as climate change. Getting user feedback early and often is crucial, because when you're designing something again, you want the design to actually match the experience, so you don't deliver a solution that nobody finds useful or won't use at all, and they go back to the old ways that they're doing, or you have a lot of paper where you really need things digitized. And then finally, always be iterating. So once you deliver the solution, it's not a success and you're done. It's let's see how people adopt this, let's see how it works, and let's see how we can improve upon it to make it even easier, make it faster, and make it more useful going forward.
Okay, thank you. And we'll move to the Q&A portion of today, see if we can get one or two questions in. The first question, which I believe comes from GoToWebinar, I'm going to ask to Rachel. How would you suggest dealing with any inherent resistance to change that you may have encountered, either from management or from peers?
Yeah.
How did you deal with the haters?
Yeah, it was tricky, and I don't think that we're 100% successful, and quite frankly, I don't think you need to be 100% successful. I don't think that you need every single person totally on board, but there's definitely a tipping point, and you need to get pretty close, and you need to make sure that the people who are skeptical aren't particularly outspoken about it. It's certainly fine for people to be skeptical or to, be uncooperative, but they can't be standing up in meetings and, voicing that. So I had a lot of conversations. I really tried to understand where this sort of skepticism was coming from. Do you think it's not going to work? Do you think it works okay now? More often than not, people sort of said, I don't really know what we're solving for. I can do my job fine. And it was clear that they had a pretty narrow understanding of what the system was going to do, and it really meant explaining challenges that other teams and other colleagues were having, and particularly for folks in management positions or on our leadership team, appreciating that their colleagues were up against some pretty difficult pain points, I think was helpful in convincing them that you may be able to do your job fine right now, other people really can't, and we're trying to solve for that. And then, and I think this is a decision that everybody has to make, but I also designed ways of taking some of the burden away from people and making it as easy as possible for them to use. So we have people that are not going to learn to build a new report, and they want it emailed to them once a week because they like email and that's how they're used to doing it. And I just made the decision that that's okay with me. It is more important to me that people get the information that they want and need than that they are powerhouse Salesforce users. So we scan people's business cards for them and enter them into Salesforce rather than expecting people to get back from a conference and upload, 15 or 20 business cards all at once. So there's a lot
choosing your battles, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Being able to figure out what behaviors to change and what were unnecessary.
Yeah.
I'd love to jump in on that one. Choosing your battles is so important, and then incentivizing comes as a big part of that as well. But really, like the key points for this would, from my perspective, would be consistent, be transparent, and absolutely be willing to own up to mistakes, because there will be issues, there will be things that come up that don't work perfectly, and really being a champion for your own system, but being recognizing when to kind of secede to any other larger topics at hand it establishes the trust with your user base that they need to be able to successfully adopt.
Okay, we are almost at time, so there were a few questions that we were unable to answer, but we will be able to respond to you. If you asked a question, we'll be able to respond directly. Wanted to say thank you to our panelists and to our audience for joining. Like I mentioned, GrantBook is always trying to improve our webinars, so if you can take a few minutes to answer the short feedback survey that's on the slide now, we will be, for those folks that do complete the survey, we'll be randomly selecting 10 people for a free digital strategy consultation. And also, if you want to dive into this webinar a little bit later, or you want to share with colleagues that weren't able to attend, we are going to be posting the webinar recording to our website, and we'll be sharing out the slides as well as this link and feedback link in a follow-up email as well. So It is now on the dot, the end of the webinar, so thank you again, Jereme, Lauren, and Rachel, and thank you to everyone who was able to join today. If you have any further questions, you can contact me at Kathryn@grantbook.org or tweet us at grantbook.org. Thank you, everyone, and good luck with all your technology adoption strategies. I'm going to say goodbye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.